Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And by the way, nailed it. You've done a great job so far. And mazel tov to the entire family. So, because I have the pleasure of serving in a nonprofit, I work for the Hope and Healing Center and Institute as its community aging specialist, focusing on the efforts of caregivers, but also in matters pertaining to aging, to resilience, to ethics, to spirituality. I have the luxury of looking at remarks well ahead of time, and I don't have the same kind of schedule that your clergy have. So I prepared a story, and I prepared a sermon. And I leave it up to you to decide which one to give. Had a feeling. I was ready to go with the sermon. I was ready to go fire, brimstone, 10 Commandments. It is Parashat Yitro after all. And I still can if you decide that you want to hear the sermon afterwards. We'll see what happens. Stranger things have happened. So every child here, and every person who has ever been a child and is now an adult, has been asked at some point, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now the response is usually some sort of profession. I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an astronaut, a scientist. But as we grow up, we realize that there's a more holistic answer. When all is said and done, when I finally grow up, I want to be me. That is, the most authentic, honest version of me that I can possibly be. Whatever work fills my days, I never want to forget who I truly am in my mind and in my soul. Now, in many ways, this answer mirrors the prophet Micah when he shares with all of the generations, "It has been told to you, O mortal, what is good, and what the Eternal requires of you. Only this, to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God." You know, centuries after Micah's wisdom, we were blessed to hear its modern echo a few years ago in the form of a contemporary tale spun by Rabbi Ed Feinstein of Encino, California. He is a gem, and I'm glad he's still with us in this world. One of my favorite stories of his is entitled The Jester, and that is what I'm sharing with you tonight. I hope it brings you some perspective and some joy. Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled his kingdom with wisdom and compassion. As he approached the end of his days, everyone in the kingdom wondered who would be the next ruler. Would it be one of the king's children? Maybe a trusted advisor, maybe a general. To keep contenders from fighting over the throne, the king put his instructions in a letter, which was to be opened only on the day of his death. That letter named the person who would succeed him on the throne. So the sad day arrived, and the kingdom mourned its wise and caring leader. And then all eyes turned to the king's letter to see who would rule in his place. So with great ceremony, the prime minister opened the letter and read the instruction. Who had the king chosen? Not one of his children, not an advisor, not a general. No, the king had chosen the jester. The jester would be crowned king. The jester? Everyone in the kingdom thought that this must be, if you'll excuse the expression, some kind of joke. How could a professional fool be a king? But such were the departed ruler's instructions. And so the jester was brought before the royal court. Retainers, they removed his jester costume and cloaked him in the robes of the king. They removed his jester hat and crowned him king. And they sat him on the royal throne. At first, the situation was a bit awkward, both for the new king and for his kingdom. But over time, it turned out to have been a brilliant choice. Turned out that the jester was every bit as wise, as compassionate, as insightful as the older king. He listened to everyone with care. Advisors, yes. Generals, yes. But especially the commoners of the realm. He treated everyone who came before him with respect and, more importantly, with kindness. He used his power to bring peace and prosperity to the land. So to the amazement of all in the royal court and throughout the kingdom, the jester proved to be a superb ruler. And pretty soon, all came to love him. But there was a bit of a mystery about the Jester King. You see, every so often he'd retreat to a distant room in the palace, a room to which only he had the key. For a few hours, he'd lock himself in that room. Then he'd return to the throne and resume his duties. Most in the royal court assumed that he went into that distant room to think, to meditate, perhaps to pray. They accepted the mystery as part of their beloved king's life. So years passed. And then an ambassador arrived from a distant land. This ambassador ended up spending hours and hours with the king. They grew to appreciate the king's wisdom and the king's kindness. It was rare, they thought, for a king to listen as carefully as this king listened. It was unusual for a king to seek advice from everyone who appeared before him, and it was remarkable for a king to care as deeply and to work as hard for the good of his subjects as this king did. When the ambassador noticed that the king occasionally disappeared into his distant room, they wondered, what does the king do in that room? Why does he go there? What's in that room that helps him rule with such wisdom and kindness? The ambassador couldn't let go of the mystery. So one day, when the king retreated to his room, they secretly followed him. After the king closed and locked the door, the ambassador crouched down and peered through the keyhole. And there they took in the king's secret. In the privacy of that room, the king took off his crown and his royal robes and put on the costume of a jester. Round and round the room he danced, he made funny faces, he sang the foolish songs of a jester. And then he stopped and walked to a great mirror, stood before it, and recited slowly and deliberately to himself, again and again, "Never forget who you are. You may look and sound and act like a king, but you are merely a jester. You are merely a jester pretending to be a king. Never forget who you are." Well, now the ambassador understood. They understood the source of the king's wisdom. They understood that the king's kindness, the king's greatness, emanated from his humility. And now they knew the secret of the king's humility. This knowledge made the ambassador love the king even more deeply. And so they vowed their everlasting personal loyalty to that king. And they vowed to keep the king's secret. Over the years, the king and the ambassador grew ever closer. And one day, while they were alone, the ambassador finally confessed what had been done and what had been seen. "I promise you on my life that I will never reveal your secret," they declared. "But there is one thing that I have never been able to figure out. Of all the people in the royal court the old king could have chosen to succeed him, why you? Why did he choose a jester?" The king smiled at the ambassador and replied, "My friend, who do you think he was before he became a king?" So wisdom, as I hope you figured out by now, isn't about having all the answers. No. Wisdom means possessing the humility and the patience to fully listen to each person's truth. Such humility is the source of true greatness, the source of true holiness. The ancient Rabbi Ben Zoma, who was inspired, I'm sure, by the prophet Micah, shared with us in Pirkei Avot a wondrous teaching. He taught, "Who is wise? One who learns from all people. Who is respected? One who honors all people." Prophet Micah, Rabbis Ben Zoma and Feinstein, may the gifts of their hearts and minds open our hearts and minds to wisdom and to wonder every single day that we're blessed to reside on this beautiful, fragile earth. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.